In 1940, the United States was the arsenal of democracy, but it had a fatal flaw. The Union Pacific Railroad, the main artery carrying steel, oil, and tanks to the Pacific Fleet, was choking. The mountains in Utah were too steep. The trains were too small. The supply chain was stalled. The War Department gave Union Pacific an ultimatum: fix the bottleneck or the war effort fails. They needed a locomotive that did not exist. They needed a machine so powerful it could pull a battleship over a mountain range without stopping. And they needed it in 12 months. To build it, American engineers had to do something considered metallurgically impossible. They could not bolt this monster together. It would rattle apart. They had to cast the entire 60,000-pound frame as a single piece of solid steel. They had 1 year to invent the biggest single pour casting in history. If the steel cracked, the project died. If the project died, the cargo stopped. This is the story of the big boy and the desperate engineering gamble that saved the war. Every time a freight train reached the Wasatch grade, the whole line felt it. The climb east out of Ogden was 1.14%, but that was enough to break a regular locomotive. The steel would groan, the wheels would slip, and the engineer would throttle back, waiting for the helpers. That's where the clock started bleeding. Crews would uncouple half the train, roll it up with a helper engine, then crawl back down for the rest. Coupling, testing brakes, checking steam. Every ritual took time. 2 hours lost for every heavy train, and the mountain never cared how urgent the cargo was. Oil for the Navy, tanks for the Army, all stalled behind a bottleneck of iron and gravity. The Wasatch wasn't just a hill, it was a choke point where the war's supply chain got stuck in the mud. Until someone found a way to drag 4,000 tons over the top in one go, the railroad was just a long, noisy parking lot. The only thing more relentless than the schedule was the grade itself. The order didn't come as a request, it came as a telegram, straight from the top. 12 months, it said. That's all the time Union Pacific had to clear the jam or risk losing the war's main artery to the Pacific. The date at the top of that telegram burned itself into every foreman's mind. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a shot clock. The Navy wanted steel and oil yesterday. The Army wanted tanks by the trainload. And every day the Wasatch bottleneck held, more ships sat empty at the docks. In the shops, the calendar became a weapon. Month 0 out of 12. Every tick of the clock meant another train stuck behind the grade, another 2 hours lost, another battle waiting on steel that hadn't crossed the mountains yet. There wasn't time for debate or for second tries. The railroad men pinned that telegram to the wall. You want your war effort? Then get it over the Wasatch in one shot. No more helpers, no more stops, no more excuses. The countdown had started. Every man in the foundry, every engineer at the drafting table, every machinist on the line. 12 months to build something no one had ever built before. If they failed, the whole supply chain would seize up. If they cracked under pressure, so would the war. You want to know why the big boy could do what no other locomotive dared? It comes down to wheels and weight, shop floor math, not magic. Start with the numbers, 4884. That is not a code, it is a battle plan. 4 wheels out front, they are your scouts. Guide wheels keep the nose steady when you are flying down the line at speed. No wobble, no derailment, just clean tracking. Then you hit the real muscle. 16 driving wheels split into 2 sets of 8. That is the power block. Each set is hinged and articulated, so this monster can twist around mountain curves without tearing itself apart. Those drivers are where the steel meets the rail, where 620,000 pounds of locomotive digs in and refuses to stop for any hill. On the tail end, 4 more wheels, the trailing wheels, carry the firebox. Not a dainty little stove, but a furnace big enough to roast a truck. You need that much fire to make steam for 16 drivers. That is how you turn coal and water into raw, unyielding force. The whole machine is a rolling power plant, built for one job: Pull 4,000 tons up a 1.14% grade without a helper in sight. The old engines had to beg for help. Too many wheels doing too little work, too much flex in the frame. Every time you stopped to add a helper, you lost 2 hours and half your nerve. Bolted frames worked loose, steam leaked from every joint, and the strain found every weakness. That is why the big boy needed a one-piece spine, no bolts, no seams, just 60,000 pounds of cast steel from General Steel Castings in Granite City, Illinois. Only that foundry could pour a frame this size, with the integral cylinders fused right into the bed. No bolted on patches, no leaks, no flex. You get a seamless backbone that can take a pounding from mountain curves and keep the steam tight at full throttle. Here is the trick. When you cast the cylinders as part of the frame, you solve two problems at once. First, you stop the flex that cracks bolts and lets the power leak away. Second, you stop the steam from escaping, so every ounce of pressure goes straight to the wheels. That is an advantage. Every other railroad was still patching up leaks, while the big boy was putting every pound of steam to work, all day, every day. This was not engineering for the sake of blueprints. This was math with consequences. Every wheel, every hinge, every pound of steel was there to buy back time lost on the Wasatch. The big boy's wheel logic was not about looking pretty on a diagram, it was about not stopping. It was about keeping the war moving, one unbroken run over the mountain at a time. You can have all the brave soldiers you want. If we cannot pour this frame without a crack, they do not get their tanks. That is the truth of logistics, written in steel and sweat. Bolts are for bridges and barn doors. They are not for something that has to drag half a navy over the Wasatch without stopping. That is why, when the engineers came to the foundry with their blueprints, they did not ask for another stack of bolted plates. They wanted a one-piece spine, 60,000 pounds of steel cast in a single shot. No seams, no joints, no excuses. You mess this up, there is no patching it later. Every old locomotive that ever crawled up that grade had a weak spot somewhere in its bones. Bolted frames flexed under the pounding, every jolt working those bolts loose, every vibration hunting for the next leak. You would hear the frame start to sing, and you knew the steam was finding its way out, one hiss at a time. That is tonnage bleeding off, and time bleeding with it. The war cannot afford that kind of waste. So here is the gamble. You pour the whole backbone at once, with the cylinders cast right into the bed. No separate pieces, no gaskets, no bolts to rattle loose. That is called integral cylinders. Think of it like pouring the heart and the bones in the same mold. If you get it right, you have a frame that will not twist, will not crack, will not leak a single ounce of power. Every bit of steam you make is going straight to the wheels. That is the edge. The other railroads are still tightening bolts and chasing leaks, and we are building something that shrugs off a mountain like it is a molehill. But do not think for a second this was the easy road. General Steel Castings in Granite City, Illinois, was the only outfit in the country crazy enough, or good enough, to even try it. That mold was the size of a swimming pool, and every pour was a roll of the dice. One cold shut, one bubble, one pause in the flow, and you are looking at 60,000 pounds of scrap. The whole war effort was waiting on a river of molten steel, and the clock was ticking loud enough to rattle your teeth. Shop talk gets real simple when the stakes are this high. Bolted frames are fine for peacetime. But when you are running flat out, round the clock, with every axle screaming and every shipment riding on your back, you need a backbone that does not blink. That is what the one-piece spine gave us, a frame that could take a hammering from the Wasatch and come out the other side ready for more. It is not just about making something big, it is about making something that will not quit, no matter how hard the mountain hits back. That is why we went all in on the casting gamble. You can have all the brave soldiers you want. If we cannot pour this frame without a crack, they do not get their tanks. Steel doesn't care about the war. It doesn't care about deadlines or telegrams or the Navy's supply chain. Steel only listens to heat. In Granite City, Illinois, General Steel Castings was the only place in the country mad enough to try pouring a 60,000-pound locomotive spine in one go. You want to know what pressure feels like? It's not the telegram on the wall. It's the moment when the ladle tips and 2,800 degrees of molten steel start their run. You get one shot. If you stop, if you hesitate, if you let the metal cool or the flow stutter, you get a cold shut, a seam where the fronts meet and harden before they fuse. That's a crack waiting to happen. 60,000 pounds of scrap. The war waits while you start over. Inside the foundry, the air was thick with grit and sweat, the kind you can taste on your tongue. The mold was the size of a swimming pool, sunk into the shop floor. Every man on the crew knew his job. The ladle team, the crane operator, the guy with the pyrometer checking the heat. The gating schematic was tacked up where everyone could see it. Sprues, runners, risers, every path mapped out so the steel would flow fast and fill every corner before it could cool. The risers stood like sentries, holding back shrinkage, feeding molten metal as the casting set up, fighting off the voids that could kill the pour from the inside. The clock wasn't just ticking for us, it was pounding. The Army wanted tanks, the Navy wanted oil, the railroad wanted the jam cleared yesterday. But here, in the heat, all that mattered was the pour. You don't rush steel, you don't slow it down. You keep the flow steady, minutes, not hours, to fill that mold. If you lose your nerve, if you let the ladle run dry or the metal drop below temperature, you're done. Cold shut, scrap pile, start again if you have the time. The foreman barked orders, but the real boss was the metal. You watch the color, listen for the hiss, feel the heat through your boots. Every sense tuned to the flow. The men moved in rhythm, swapping out ladles, never letting the stream break. The whole foundry held its breath. No one talked about the war, no one talked about the deadline, they talked about the pour. Because you can have all the brave soldiers you want. If I can't pour this frame without a crack, they don't get their tanks. That's not drama, that's just the truth, written in heat and steel and the silence that follows when the last drop hits the mold. No one on the Wasatch cared about blueprints or theory when the day finally came. What mattered was the number on the cab, 4,000, and the crew who drew the short straw to drive it. The yard boss handed them the manifest. 4,000 tons of Army steel, Navy oil, rolling stock packed end to end. Every car meant another promise to the front lines. The old hands watched from the siding, arms crossed, waiting to see if all that foundry talk could buy a single minute back from the mountain. The fireman loaded coal like he was feeding a blast furnace. You could feel the heat pouring off the firebox, enough to turn your eyebrows to ash if you got too close. The engineer eased the throttle open. 16 drivers dug in. The rails groaned, but nothing slipped. No helpers, no uncoupling, just the whole train, nose to tail, rolling toward the grade. At the foot of the Wasatch, every other engine would have stopped. The big boy just squared its shoulders and started to climb. The gauge showed the pressure holding. The one-piece frame, cast in Granite City and weighing 60,000 pounds of steel, took the strain like it was born for it. Not a single bolt rattled loose, no hiss of steam leaking from a bad joint. Every ounce of power went straight to the rail. That is what you get with integral cylinders, no flex, no wasted energy, just raw force moving uphill. The grade tried to pull the train back. The engineer did not flinch. He watched the speed drop, then level out. 4 leading wheels kept the nose steady. The articulated hinge swung open on the first tight curve. The whole locomotive flexed like a steel snake, not a rigid plank. The mountain threw its best punch. The big boy just kept hauling. Halfway up, the crew checked the log. No slow order, no stop for helpers. The clock, always the enemy, was suddenly on their side. The dispatcher board started to clear. Trains that had stacked up for hours behind the bottleneck were moving again. The Navy oil and the Army tanks were not waiting at the foot of the mountain anymore. They were on their way west at last. At the summit, The big boy rolled over the top without breaking stride. The crew looked at each other, no one said a word. They did not have to. The numbers in the operating log told the story: 4,000 tons, 1 locomotive, no helpers, grade conquered. The roundhouse men started to believe the foundry's gamble had paid off. The bottleneck was gone. The war's supply line was moving. That is what a good casting buys you: time and the right to keep the promise you made when the telegram came down. Good casting. Bolts loosen. Castings are forever. And on that day, the mountain learned to get out of the way. You can have all the heroes you want, but if the steel frame gives out, the whole war grinds to a halt. General Steel Castings in Granite City poured what nobody else could: a one-piece spine with integral cylinders, no bolts, no leaks, no flex. Today, every supply chain and battlefield still runs on what's poured, not promised. Bolts loosen. Castings and consequences last forever. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.